Inside the pressure hull of submarine B-59, 300 feet below the Sargasso Sea, the air has turned to soup. It is October 27, 1962, Black Saturday, and the temperature inside the Soviet Foxtrot has climbed past 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Men slump against torpedo racks, skin slick, breath shallow. The carbon dioxide scrubbers are failing. For 4 days, the boat has run submerged, batteries dying, pursued by American destroyers whose sonar pings arrive like hammer blows through the hull. Then the depth charges begin. They are practice charges, meant as signals. Come up, surface now. The Americans call it signaling. Inside B-59, it sounds like war. Each detonation shudders through steel ribs and human bone. The men do not know these are warnings. They do not know President Kennedy has quarantined Cuba, that their flotilla has stumbled into a blockade line, that the world above is lurching toward thermonuclear exchange. They know only that they have lost contact with Moscow for days, that the destroyers are closing, and that doctrine is clear. Captain Valentin Savitsky stands in the command compartment, face gray, uniform soaked through. He has followed orders to the edge of the world. Stealth, the submarine's doctrine, its sacrament, has failed. His boat is exposed, hunted, cornered. The next depth charge may not be a signal. He turns to the weapons officer. His voice is hoarse but steady. Prepare the special weapon. The special weapon is a nuclear-tipped torpedo, yield roughly equivalent to the Hiroshima bomb. Authorization protocols catastrophically vague. Doctrine permits its use if the submarine is under threat and unable to contact command. Savitsky believes both conditions are met. 2 officers must concur to arm it. The weapons officer nods. Savitsky looks to the second man required. Vasily Arkhipov, chief of staff of the entire submarine flotilla, is aboard B-59 by accident of assignment. He holds equal rank to Savitsky, and in the suffocating heat, with the hull shaking and men crying out, Arkhipov says no. It is disobedience dressed as caution, improvisation wrapped in the thinnest procedural cover. He does not shout. He does not invoke grand principles. He argues they lack reliable intelligence, that surfacing is humiliating but not fatal, that using the weapon without confirmation from Moscow is a step no man should take alone. The confrontation lasts minutes. Eyewitness accounts describe raised voices, desperate gestures, Savitsky pacing, but the chain of command frays in strange ways under pressure. Arkhipav's rank gives him a veto he perhaps should not have had. He uses it. B-59 will surface an hour later, battered and trailing oil, her crew blinking in the Caribbean sun as American helicopters circle. The torpedo remains in its tube. The world will not learn how close it came for decades. This is the story of that refusal. We will trace how a diesel submarine built for coastal defense ended up carrying a nuclear weapon into the most dangerous waters on Earth, why American destroyers hunted it without knowing what it held, and how duty colliding with disobedience, doctrine with improvisation, stealth with exposure, turned one man's decision into a hinge of history. You will see time-stamped maps plotting B-59's voyage, hear the sonar pings that pushed Savitsky to the brink, and read patrol log entries capturing desperation in bureaucratic ink. The question is not whether Arkhipov saved the world. Causality is never that neat. The question is what happens when the choice falls to men who are drowning. The confrontation aboard B-59 did not begin with depth charges. It began 3 weeks earlier with a lie of omission. On October 1, 1962, 4 Project 641 diesel-electric submarines, NATO designation Foxtrot, slip out of Seda Bay on the Kola Peninsula. Their mission, covert deployment to Mariel Kiba, to establish a forward submarine squadron capable of threatening American sea lanes. Each boat carries a crew of 78, provisions for 45 days, and 1 special weapon, a nuclear torpedo designated T5, 10 kilotons, authorized for use under conditions so vague they amount to commander's discretion. The submarines sail under strict radio silence. Moscow's orders are explicit. Remain undetected. What Moscow does not tell them is that by the time they reach the Caribbean, the rules will have changed. On October 22, President Kennedy announces a naval quarantine around Cuba. The word is chosen carefully. Blockade implies war, quarantine implies public health, but the effect is the same. The U.S. Navy establishes a 500-mile arc from Cape Maese to the western tip of Cuba, patrolled by 2 aircraft carriers, 26 destroyers, and patrol squadrons flying round the clock. Standing orders: identify and force to the surface any unidentified submarine. The method, according to American doctrine, is simple. Drop a pattern of practiced depth charges, 4 to 5 grenades, shallow fused, calibrated to rattle but not kill. The message: we know you are here. Surface and identify yourself. It is signaling, a conversation in explosives. Except the Soviet submarine crews are never informed that the Americans intend to signal. Moscow does not update the orders. The Foxtrot captains steam south, believing that any depth charge is an act of war, and that their boats, already deep in hostile waters, are on their own. By October 24, all 4 submarines have crossed into the quarantine zone. B-59, commanded by Captain Valentin Savitsky, with Flotilla Chief of Staff Vasily Arkhipov embarked, is running submerged in the Sargasso Sea, roughly 300 miles northeast of Cuba. The other Foxtrots are scattered across the approaches, equally blind. Radio silence means no updates, no clarification, no word that the crisis above has metastasized. They navigate by dead reckoning and intercept fragments of American broadcasts they cannot fully decode. Diesel-electric boats are not built for this. A Foxtrot's endurance is a function of battery capacity. Submerged, running on electric motors, it can make perhaps 2 knots for a few days before the batteries drain and it must surface to run the diesels and recharge. Surfacing means exposure. Exposure violates the cardinal doctrine of submarine warfare: stay hidden. But machinery does not negotiate. The batteries drain. The heat builds. Diesel engines and human bodies both consume oxygen and produce carbon dioxide. A submerged Foxtrot becomes a slow oven. Temperatures inside B-59 climb past 100 degrees, then 110, then 120. The air thickens. Men ration water. 1 glass per day per man, used first for drinking, then for wiping skin, then for nothing, because there is none left. The carbon dioxide scrubbers labor and fail. Headaches bloom. Judgment frays. This is where doctrine meets human limits. Vasily Arkhipov understands this in the way few officers do. 16 months ago, on July 4, 1961, he was aboard K-19, the Soviet Navy's first ballistic missile submarine, when a coolant pipe ruptured in the reactor compartment 800 miles north of Greenland. The boat carried no backup cooling system, a design failure born of rushed construction and doctrinal optimism. The reactor temperature spiked toward criticality. A meltdown would trigger the torpedoes, the warheads, a steam explosion that would sink the boat with all hands and possibly irradiate NATO waters enough to provoke retaliation. The captain, Nikolai Zakhaev, ordered a repair crew into the reactor space wearing only raincoats and gas masks as shielding. Arkhipov, then the executive officer, helped organize the rotation, men in 3-minute shifts welding a bypass coolant loop while radiation burned them from the inside. 8 sailors died within days, 15 more within 2 years. The reactor was saved. The boat surfaced. Arkhipov survived, his skin blistered, his hair thinned, his faith in procedural certainty permanently altered. He learned that doctrine assumes functioning equipment, accurate intelligence, and commanders who are rested, hydrated, and thinking clearly. Strip those away, and doctrine becomes a script for catastrophe. Now, aboard B-59, he watches those variables collapse. The boat must surface to charge batteries and ventilate, but surfacing near American destroyers guarantees detection. Stealth, the submarine's religion, demands silence. Survival demands air. Doctrine offers no answer for this. Improvisation, forbidden, dangerous, necessary, becomes the only alternative. The American destroyers detect B-59 on October 27, not by sonar, but by the faint thermal bloom of her hull, her snorkel mast breaking the surface for desperate gulps of diesel-fed air. They close in. The practice depth charges begin. Inside the hull, men who have been submerged for 4 days in suffocating heat hear thunder and feel the ocean trying to crush them. They do not hear a signal, they hear war. And Captain Savitsky, doctrine-bound and oxygen-starved, reaches for the only response he believes he has left. The first practice depth charge detonates at 10:52 a.m., 50 meters off the starboard quarter. Inside B-59, the explosion arrives as a physical fact. The hull flexes, light bulbs shatter, men lurch against bulkheads, grabbing for handholds that are slick with condensation and sweat. In the forward torpedo room, a technician vomits into a bucket already half full. The temperature is 122 degrees Fahrenheit. The air tastes like metal and exhaustion. Carbon dioxide concentration has climbed past 1%, high enough that men are seeing spots, high enough that decisions made in the next hour will be made by brains starved of oxygen. Captain Valentin Savitsky is in the command compartment when the second charge hits, closer this time, a percussive slap that rattles the depth gauge needles. He has not slept in 36 hours. His uniform is crusted with salt. For 4 days, B-59 has run submerged, chased by American destroyers whose sonar pings have become a constant metallic shriek through the hull. The boat's batteries are nearly dead, 12% capacity, enough for perhaps 2 more hours of maneuvering. Surfacing to recharge means breaking the one doctrine that has kept submarines alive since 1914: stay hidden. But staying submerged means the crew will start to pass out, and then the boat will surface anyway, dead in the water, helpless. Savitsky has been trained his entire career to follow orders. His orders are to remain undetected, to reach Cuba, to establish a forward base. He has done everything doctrine demands. He has maintained radio silence. He has evaded contact. He has pushed his boat and his men to the edge of human endurance in service of the mission. And now the Americans are dropping explosives on him. A third charge detonates directly overhead. The lights go out. Emergency lanterns flicker on, casting the compartment in red. Somewhere aft, a man is screaming. Savitsky's voice cuts through the noise. They are trying to sink us. It is a reasonable conclusion. The captain has received no communication from Moscow in 6 days. He does not know that President Kennedy has announced a quarantine. He does not know that the U.S. Navy has been ordered to signal submerged submarines with practice grenades, small charges, non-lethal, intended as a message. All he knows is that his boat is surrounded, that depth charges are falling, and that the last intelligence briefing before leaving Saida Bay warned that war with America was possible. Perhaps he thinks it has already started. Perhaps these are the opening salvos. Perhaps Moscow is burning and he is here, blind and deaf, 300 feet down with 78 men depending on him to act. He turns to his weapons officer, Lieutenant Fyodor Dubivko. Prepare the special weapon. The order lands like a stone in still water. The special weapon, T-5 nuclear torpedo, 10-kiloton warhead, sits in tube number 2, 3 meters long, painted gray, unremarkable except for the red stripe along its casing and the alphanumeric stencil that marks it as something other than conventional ordnance. Soviet doctrine governing its use is a masterpiece of ambiguity. The weapon may be employed if the submarine is under attack and unable to communicate with command. Both conditions in Savitsky's assessment are met, but authorization requires more than the captain's word. The protocol, imposed after years of near accidents and close calls in a Navy that has lost submarines to battery fires, reactor meltdowns, and unexplained disasters, demands consent from multiple officers. On most submarines, that means the captain and the political officer. On B-59, it means something more complicated. Vasily Arkhipov is not supposed to be here. As chief of staff of the entire 4-boat flotilla, he should be aboard the flagship, but command reassignments and scheduling quirks placed him on B-59 for this mission. Subordinate in the chain of command, but equal in rank to Savitsky. His presence creates a procedural ambiguity. Does he have a vote? Does his rank give him veto power? In the calm of a staff college classroom, these questions would be debated. In the suffocating red twilight of a submarine under attack, they're about to be answered in real time. Dubivko, the weapons officer, looks to Arkhipov. Sir? Arkhipov does not answer immediately. He is leaning against the chart table, one hand braced on its edge. His face is pale, slick with sweat, but his eyes are clear. He has been here before. Not here exactly, but in a place close enough. 16 months ago, aboard K-19, He stood in a compartment filled with dying men and helped organize a repair that doctrine said was impossible. He learned then that the gap between what orders assume and what reality delivers can swallow ships and crews whole. He learned that the men who survive are the ones who stop following the script when the script stops making sense. He straightens. No. The word is quiet, but it fills the space. Savitsky turns, disbelief hardening into anger. We are under attack. We do not know that, Arkhipov says. His voice is calm, methodical, the tone of a man explaining a navigation error. We have heard explosions. We have not been hit. We have not received orders to engage. We have received no orders at all. Savitsky's voice cracks. Moscow is silent. The Americans are on top of us. If we wait until they breach the hull, it will be too late. If we fire, it will also be too late. Arkhipov moves closer, his voice dropping so that only Savitsky and the officers nearest can hear. If we use that weapon, Captain, the Americans will retaliate. They will have to. And we will have started a war we cannot stop and cannot survive. Another depth charge detonates farther this time, but the boom still rolls through the compartment. A checklist clipboard falls from its hook and clatters to the deck. No one picks it up. Savitsky gestures toward the overhead, toward the unseen destroyers circling above. If they wanted to talk, they would not be dropping charges. If they wanted to kill us, we would already be dead. Arkhipov's tone sharpens. Those are small charges, signals, harassment. They want us to surface. Surfacing is surrender. Surfacing is survival. It is disobedience dressed as pragmatism, a refusal wrapped in the language of caution. Arkhipov is not invoking grand strategy or moral philosophy. He is arguing procedural inadequacy. We lack intelligence. We lack confirmation. We lack the certainty that doctrine assumes. But beneath that unspoken is a deeper argument, that duty to the crew, to the 78 men choking on carbon dioxide and heat, outweighs duty to a protocol written by men in Moscow, who are breathing clean air and sleeping in beds. Savitsky stares at him. The compartment has gone silent except for the hum of failing ventilation fans and the ragged breathing of exhausted men. The battery indicator on the electrical panel blinks 11%. The captain's face is unreadable. Rage, desperation, calculation, all compressed into a mask of control that is cracking at the edges. Savitsky says slowly, "I am the captain of this vessel, and I am chief of staff of this flotilla." Arkhipov does not blink. My rank gives me standing to speak. I am speaking. The procedural ambiguity, the accident of assignment that put a flotilla commander on a single boat becomes a lifeline. In a normal chain of command, Savitsky's word would be final, but Arkhipov's presence disrupts the normal chain. He is not subordinate, he is peer, and in the absence of clear orders from Moscow, in the absence of reliable intelligence, in the chaos of oxygen deprivation and fear, that ambiguity creates space for argument. Dubivko, the weapons officer, looks between them. He has not moved toward the torpedo tube. The checklist for arming the special weapon remains unlit, untouched. Savitsky's jaw tightens. We have surfaced exposed, humiliated. I would have us alive, Arkhipov says, and able to receive orders before we end the world. The phrase hangs in the hot air. End the world. It is melodrama and truth in equal measure. One torpedo will not incinerate the planet, but one torpedo will sink American ships, will kill American sailors, will land on desks in Washington and Moscow as proof that the shooting war has begun. And once it begins, the logic of escalation, retaliation, counter-retaliation, the missiles in Cuba and Turkey and silos across 2 continents will follow with the inevitability of a depth charge sinking through water. Savitsky knows this. He is not a fool, but he is also not a man accustomed to improvisation, to breaking the script. His entire career has been built on obedience to doctrine, on following orders even when they are hard, especially when they are hard. Surfacing feels like failure. Arming the weapon feels like duty. The silence stretches. Then, finally, Savitsky turns away. He does not countermand the order. He doesn't have to. Without Arkhipov's concurrence, the torpedo cannot be armed. The protocol imposed to prevent accidents has just prevented some 300 feet above B-59, aboard the destroyer USS Beale, Sonarman Second Class William Fisher watches a green phosphor trace crawl across his scope. Contact Sierra 7 has been on the board for 40 minutes, moving southwest at 3 knots, depth estimated 280 feet. Fisher marks the bearing, calls it to the Combat Information Center, and logs it with the dispassion of a man doing a job he has done 24 times this month. The Caribbean is lousy with submarines, Soviet Foxtrots, maybe a Zulu class, all trying to slip through the quarantine line. The task force has detected 4 possibles in the last week. This is just another one. Steady on 220, the CIC officer says over the intercom. Prepare signal charges. Fisher copies the order. Signal charges, not attack depth charges. Those are bigger, deeper fused, designed to crack a pressure hull. Signal charges are 4-pound Mark 64 grenades set to detonate at 60 feet, loud enough to rattle teeth and make a point, but calibrated not to kill. The message, according to the manual, is unambiguous. Surface and identify yourself under international law. The Soviet Navy, Fisher assumes, knows the protocol. Everyone knows the protocol. He has no idea that the submarine below him carries a nuclear weapon, or that its captain has just been talked out of using it. Aboard USS Coney, steaming 2,000 yards to starboard, Executive Officer Lieutenant Commander Robert Watts stands on the bridge wing with binoculars trained on the patch of ocean where sonar has painted the contact. The sea is flat, glittering under midday sun, empty. Somewhere beneath that mirror surface is a steel tube full of men who have been playing hide-and-seek for days. Watts respects the stamina. Diesel boats are not built for endurance runs. The Soviets must be cooking down there. Depth charge away, the talker announces. Watts watches the canister arc off Coney's stern and splash into the sea. 5 seconds later, the water bulges and splits, a white geyser punching skyward. The thump rolls across the surface, muffled but solid. He lowers the binoculars and checks his watch. If the contact follows the pattern of the others, it will surface within the hour. Humiliated, low on battery, crew exhausted but intact. Coney and Beale will log the identification, take photographs, and let it go. The quarantine is a political line, not a shooting war. Not yet. Watts does not imagine that 300 feet below, men are screaming. Inside B-59, the argument has moved from the command compartment to the narrow passageway outside the captain's cabin. Savitsky has retreated there, not to hide, but to think, and Arkhipov has followed. The rest of the crew cannot hear the words, but they can read the silences, long, tense gaps punctuated by low voices and the occasional raised syllable that cuts through the bulkheads. Arkhipov is pressing his case with the methodical patience of a man who has already survived one impossible situation and knows that panic is gasoline on a fire. He does not argue ideology, he does not question Savitsky's courage, he argues facts. Captain, we have been submerged for 96 hours. The men are at the edge of collapse. If we do not ventilate within the next 2 hours, we will start losing consciousness. You cannot fight a boat with an unconscious crew. Savitsky, slumped on a fold-down bunk, stares at the deck. If we surface, we are captured, interrogated. The Americans will learn our capabilities, our orders, our weapons. If we fire, we are dead, Arkhipov counters, and so are they, and so is everyone in Moscow and Washington when the retaliation comes. You know this. Savitsky's head snaps up. You do not know that. One torpedo does not guarantee escalation. One nuclear torpedo guarantees retaliation. Arkhipov's voice hardens just slightly. The Americans do not know we have it. If we use it, they will learn in the worst possible way, with their ships sinking and their sailors dying. What do you think happens next? Do you think Kennedy calls it an accident? Another depth charge detonates, farther away this time, but still close enough to vibrate through the hull. The overhead light flickers. Arkhipov steadies himself against the bulkhead and continues. We do not have reliable intelligence. We do not have communication with Moscow. We do not have confirmation that war has started. What we have is heat, exhausted men, and destroyers that are signaling, not sinking us. If they wanted us dead, Captain, we would be dead. Savitsky closes his eyes. His hands are shaking. Fatigue, heat, the weight of a decision no training ever prepared him for. He has been dutiful his entire career. Duty has brought him here, to a boat full of suffocating men and a choice that doctrine does not answer. Arkhipov is offering him an exit that looks like leadership instead of surrender. "All compartments," Savitsky says into the intercom, his voice cracking. "Prepare to surface. Secure the special weapon. We are going up." The order moves through the boat like wind through a cave. Men who had been lying motionless sit up. The weapons officer locks down the T-5 torpedo, safeguards re-engaged, the red-striped casing disappearing back into the shadows of tube number 2. Engineers start the procedure to blow the ballast tanks, routing precious compressed air into the chambers that will lift the boat toward daylight. B-59 begins to rise. On the surface, sonarman Fisher marks the depth change. "Contact Sierra 7 ascending, rate 50 feet per minute. Stand by for visual," the CIC officer orders. Aboard Coney, Lieutenant Commander Robert Watts raises his binoculars again, scanning the water. The other destroyers, Beale, Murray, and Lowry, have formed a loose square, a steel net around the invisible contact. A Navy P-2V Neptune patrol plane orbits overhead. Cameras ready. This is the moment the manual promised. Compliance, identification, a textbook resolution. Then the sea begins to foam. The Foxtrot's conning tower breaks the surface first, black steel shedding water in sheets. Then the forward deck casing, barnacled and streaked with rust. B-59 rises like a breaching whale, her hull slick and battered, her saddle tanks venting compressed air in great roaring plumes. She is ringed by American ships, destroyers to port and starboard, a helicopter clattering in from the carrier, the patrol plane dropping low for a photographic pass. Stealth, the religion that kept her hidden, is gone. Exposure is absolute. Inside the submarine, the hatch cracks open, and air, real air, clean and cool and infinite, pours into the hull. Men gasp, some laughing, some weeping. The temperature begins to fall. The CO2 alarms stop wailing. Light streams down through the hatch, white and blinding after 4 days of red emergency lamps. Vasily Arkhipov climbs the ladder to the bridge, blinking in the Caribbean sun. Around him, American ships glide through calm water, their crews lining the rails, cameras clicking. A signal lamp flashes from Beale. "Identify yourself." Arkhipov looks back down the hatch at Savitsky, who has remained below, and then out at the circle of steel. The submarine has surfaced, the crew is breathing, the torpedo is still in its tube. He has disobeyed doctrine to preserve life, traded stealth for survival, and turned the most dangerous boat in the world into just another exhausted submarine caught in the quarantine it never understood. The Americans do not know how close they came. They will not know for decades. Right now, they see only a Soviet Foxtrot, surfaced and compliant, one more contact, identified and logged. Arkhipov sees something else. 78 men still alive, and a war that has not yet started. The men who saved the world were not rewarded for it. B-59 remains on the surface for 11 hours, wallowing in the swell, while her diesels hammer and her batteries slowly charge. American destroyers keep station at a respectful distance, cameras recording every detail. Hull number, configuration, the rust and wear of a boat pushed past its limits. Soviet sailors crowd the deck, gulping air, faces pale and hollow. Some strip to the waist, letting the breeze evaporate 4 days of sweat. Others simply sit, staring at the horizon. The space and light, a kind of medicine. There is no fire exchanged, no boarding, no interrogation. The Americans take their photographs, log the identification, and let the Foxtrot go. By sunset, B-59 is steaming east on the surface, alone, battered, trailing a thin line of diesel smoke. The special weapon remains in Tube 2, unfired, its existence still unknown to the men in the ships that hunted it. The patrol ends 10 days later when the submarine limps into a Soviet anchorage. The crew disembarks in silence, exhausted, some requiring medical attention for dehydration and heat injuries. There are no medals waiting, no commendations, no public acknowledgement that they were ever in the Caribbean at all. Instead, there is criticism. The debriefing in Moscow is sharp and cold. Savitsky is questioned about why he allowed his boat to be detected, why he surfaced, why he failed to complete the mission. Arkhipov, as flotilla chief of staff, shares the censure. The operation was a failure by every doctrinal measure. The submarines were detected, harassed, forced to surface, and sent home without establishing the forward base they were ordered to create. That one of them nearly ignited a thermonuclear war by firing a weapon whose very existence was supposed to be secret is not framed as a crisis averted. It is framed as a lapse in operational security, a breakdown in stealth, evidence that the crews were not resilient enough to endure the conditions the mission required. Arkhipov receives no formal punishment, but neither does he receive recognition. His career continues, steady and unremarkable. He commands a submarine squadron, then serves in staff positions, eventually rising to rear admiral before retiring in the 1980s. He does not speak publicly about October 27, 1962. The Soviet Navy does not speak about it either. The incident is classified, buried in patrol reports that will remain sealed for decades. Vasily Arkhipov dies in 1998 at age 72 from radiation-related illness likely stemming from his exposure aboard K-19. His obituary mentions his service, his rank, his devotion to the fleet. It does not mention B-59. The world learns the story in pieces. In 2002, at a conference in Havana marking the 40th anniversary of the missile crisis, surviving officers from the submarine flotilla speak publicly for the first time. Vadim Orlov, B-59's communications officer, describes the heat, the depth charges, the argument, the nuclear torpedo. The account is published, translated, circulated. Historians cross-reference it with newly declassified American and Soviet documents. The shape of what almost happened comes into focus. In 2017, the Future of Life Institute awards Arkhipov posthumously, recognizing him as a fulcrum of nuclear restraint. His widow, Olga, accepts on his behalf. The citation credits him with preventing nuclear war through calm and rational decision-making under extreme pressure. It is the recognition that never came from his own Navy, delivered 55 years late by an organization dedicated to reducing existential risk. The moral calculus of what Arkhipov did remains hard to simplify. He disobeyed, or at least refused to obey an order from a superior officer in a moment of perceived combat. In most militaries, in most circumstances, that is insubordination. But his refusal was not reckless. It was measured, grounded in procedural argument and a read of the situation that prioritized survival over protocol. He argued that the evidence for war was ambiguous, that the doctrine assumed reliable intelligence they did not have, and that using a nuclear weapon without confirmation from command was a threshold no officer should cross alone. He was right. Not because he possessed special foresight or moral clarity the others lacked, but because he had survived K-19, a disaster born from the gap between what doctrine assumed and what reality delivered. He knew that when systems fail, when information is incomplete, when men are exhausted and oxygen-starved, the safest course is the one that keeps the most options open and the most people alive. Doctrine is written for ideal conditions. Arkhipov improvised for the conditions he had. The strategic legacy is quieter, but real. The B-59 incident, once declassified, became a case study in nuclear command and control. Modern navies have since refined release protocols, tightened the requirements for special weapon authorization, and clarified communication procedures during crises. The U.S. and Soviet navies, later Russian, both revised their signaling conventions, making it harder for practice depth charges to be misinterpreted as attacks. These changes are incremental, bureaucratic, easy to overlook. They are also the kind of adjustments that prevent the next B-59. What remains is a simple, uncomfortable truth. The margin between survival and catastrophe can come down to one man's willingness to say no when doctrine says yes, to choose the ambiguity of restraint over the false clarity of escalation. Arkhipov was not a hero in the cinematic sense. He did not storm a barricade or sacrifice himself. He simply refused to authorize a weapon in the absence of certainty, and that refusal kept 78 men breathing and 2 superpowers from crossing a line they could not uncross. Disobedience in that moment was the highest form of duty. If you want to understand the crucible that forged Arkhipav's judgment, watch our companion piece on the X-19 reactor disaster. the 1961 crisis where improvisation and sacrifice saved a sinking submarine and taught one young officer that doctrine has limits. Then explore our tactical contrast on USS Growler and Commander Howard Gilmore's take-her-down decision in 1943, where obedience to survival meant leaving the captain behind. Across navies, across eras, the questions remain the same. What do we owe the mission? What do we owe the men? And who decides when those duties collide? The answers are never clean, but they are always worth asking. Before we go further, we owe you transparency about what this story rests on and where the ground gets soft. The skeleton of the B-59 incident comes from declassified American and Soviet documents, cross-referenced and translated over 2 decades of archival work. The National Security Archive at George Washington University has published the most comprehensive collection, edited by Svetlana Savranskaya and Thomas Blanton, under the title The Submarines of October. Their document set includes patrol orders, post-mission reports, and debriefings from Soviet Naval Command. On the American side, we draw from destroyer deck logs, USS Beale, DD-471, and USS Coney, DD-508, and anti-submarine warfare reports filed by carrier task groups built around USS Randolph. These logs are dry, time-stamped, and specific. Charge drop coordinates, sonar bearing changes, visual identification notes. They do not speculate, they record. The human texture, what was said inside the hull, how decisions felt in real time, comes from Russian language sources, chiefly the memoirs and interviews of officers who were there. Ryurik Katov, captain of submarine B-4 in the same flotilla, published a detailed account of the deployment. Alexander Mozgovoy's 2002 book on Soviet submarine operations during the crisis synthesized interviews with surviving crew members. Vadim Orlov, communications officer aboard B-59, gave public recollections at a 2002 Havana conference that included specific dialogue and atmospheric detail: the heat, the fear, the argument. Arkhipov himself never spoke publicly about the incident. He died in 1998. What we know of his words comes second-hand, filtered through Orlov and others who were present. Which brings us to the contested ground. First, the Nuclear Release Protocol. Soviet naval regulations governing special weapons were, and in many cases remain, classified. We know that release required more than the captain's sole authority, but whether it was a 2-officer system, a 3-man consensus, or something else is debated. Orlov describes it as requiring the captain, the political officer, and the flotilla commander if one was present, making Arkhipov's veto decisive. Other sources suggest a simpler 2-key model. We treat Orlov's account as probable, not certain, and flag it on screen as such. Second, Savitsky's quoted outburst. Variants include, "We're going to blast them now. We will die, but we will sink them all," or similar phrasing. This line appears in multiple retellings, but it originates from recollections given decades later, translated through multiple languages, and shaped by the narrative weight the moment has since acquired. It may be exact, it may be paraphrase, or it may be the kind of compressed drama that memory creates when it knows how the story ends. We will present it as reported speech, not verbatim transcript. Third, environmental conditions. The commonly cited figures 120 to 140 degrees Fahrenheit, carbon dioxide above 1%, and men collapsing come from crew interviews, not instrumentation logs. Foxtrots did not carry comprehensive environmental data recorders. The numbers are plausible given diesel-electric submarine conditions under prolonged submersion, and they align with known human tolerance thresholds. But they are eyewitness estimates, not sensor readouts. We mark them as probable and cite the human sources. Fourth, the practice depth charges themselves. American sources describe Mark 64 or similar low-yield signal grenades, often listed at 4 to 5 pounds of explosive fused for shallow detonation. Exact yield and fusing depth vary by report. Soviet accounts describe them as terrifying and perceived as lethal. Both can be true. Perception inside a pressure hull under stress does not require large explosions. We show the American doctrine and the Soviet experience side by side, letting the contrast speak. For visual authenticity, we commit to the following. Foxtrot-class interiors will be sourced from Museum Submarine B-413 in Kaliningrad, and declassified Soviet technical schematics not generic Hollywood nuclear boat sets. Soviet uniforms, insignia, and rank boards will match 1962 regulations. American destroyer imagery will reflect gearing class configuration and correct 1960s-era ASW equipment. Map overlays will use declassified patrol plots where available, interpolated positions where not, with transparency about which is which. The T-5 nuclear torpedo will be shown per known dimensions and design, no blowing warheads or nonsense. Signal charge footage will match documented Mark 64 characteristics, not the deep-fused attack charges from feature films. Every on-screen citation will carry a document title, archive, date, and where possible, a page or timestamp. Dialogue attributed to participants will be labeled with the source name and year of recollection. Contested details earn a badge, contested, probable, or confirmed, in the lower third, with a footnote explaining the evidentiary basis. At the end, a bibliographic card will list full references for viewers who want to go deeper. We do this because our audience, veteran submariners, intelligence analysts, historians with better libraries than ours, will check. They should check. The story is strong enough to survive scrutiny. Where the sources disagree, we say so. Where memory has smoothed the edges, we acknowledge it. Where the record is clear, we let it speak. The stakes are too high, and the audience too sharp for anything less. What matters is this. On October 27, 1962, a Soviet submarine surfaced in the Caribbean carrying a nuclear torpedo, and the decision not to fire it came down to an argument between exhausted men in a steel tube full of bad air. The details we argue over, exact temperatures, precise words, are footnotes to that central verified fact. B-59 surfaced. The weapon stayed in the tube. The war did not start. Now we return to what happened next and why the world took decades to learn how close it came.